It's a strange thing to have the whole banquet of life laid out before you. Comfort, safety, success, even the admiration of others, and still feel as if some essential flavor is missing. You sit there with a full plate and an empty heart, wondering how it's possible to feel lost, when by all conventional standards you've arrived. But being lost has very little to do with where you are, and everything to do with how you imagine yourself to be. It's not a geographical condition, it's a metaphysical itch, a gentle but persistent tug from the depths, whispering, "This isn't it," at least not in the way you've been taught to see it. That people often think that feeling lost is a sign of failure, as though they've missed some essential turn on the grand highway of success. Yet this sense of disorientation is often the first honest moment in a person's life. It's the moment when the mask cracks just enough for you to glimpse what lies beneath. And what lies beneath is not a deficiency, but an invitation, an opening into a deeper way of being, one that isn't measured by what you possess or achieve, but by how intimately you feel yourself woven into the fabric of existence. The curious thing is that the more you try to fill this emptiness with things, possessions, accomplishments, social approval, the more the emptiness seems to grow. It expands like a shadow at sunset. You pile up success like sandbags against a flood, and the water still rises. Because what you're trying to fill is not a hole in your life, but a gap in your understanding of who you really are. You see, most of us have been playing a rather elaborate game since childhood. We've pretended, quite convincingly, that we are these little isolated selves, enclosed within bags of skin, peering out at the world as if it were something happening to us rather than through us. We imagine ourselves to be miniature monarchs, sitting on thrones inside our skulls, surrounded by private thoughts, private ambitions, private fears. And then we wonder why we feel lonely, even in a room full of people, why we feel insecure, even when praised, why we feel restless, even when everything appears to be under control. It's as if you built a magnificent house, only to discover that you unintentionally locked yourself inside the smallest closet. Feeling lost comes from mistaking the closet for the whole house. The interesting thing about life is that it never stops tapping on the walls of that little closet, saying, "There's more than this. Come out and see." It taps through restlessness, through boredom, through the strange dissatisfaction that haunts even the most successful lives. Not because life is cruel, but because it's trying to wake you up from the dream of separateness. As in those old Zen stories where the teacher shouts, hits a table, or suddenly laughs to startle the student into awareness. Life has its own ways of knocking sharply at your door. And when you finally pause long enough to listen, you begin to realize that the feeling of being lost is not a mistake. It's the first sign that the old map, the one that told you happiness was somewhere out there, hidden behind achievement or approval, is no longer useful. You're lost only because the map was too small for the territory of your own being. The predicament is that we try to solve this inner confusion with the same strategies that created it. If achievements make you feel empty, then surely more achievements will fill the gap. If having things doesn't bring peace, perhaps having better things will do the trick. If you feel alone, try getting more attention, more admiration, more company. And round it goes, like a cat chasing its tail, spinning in circles, while the tail remains faithfully attached the entire time. The secret, of course, is not to chase it. Now, when you stop chasing, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to notice the background instead of only the foreground, the pauses between the notes instead of only the melody, the silence in which all thoughts arise instead of the thoughts themselves. And in that noticing, you begin to see that the one who feels lost is just a character in the play, a mask worn by something far deeper, far older, far more expansive than the personality who pays the bills and checks emails. It dawns on you with a kind of quiet astonishment that the awareness in which your confusion appears is not confused at all. The awareness in which your loneliness arises is not lonely. The awareness in which your questions echo is not searching for answers. You discover that beneath all your striving and worrying is a stillness that has been watching the whole performance with immense patience, much as one watches clouds drifting across a boundless sky. And here's the great cosmic joke. The moment you stop trying to find yourself, you begin to recognize that you've never actually been separate from anything at all. You're not a solitary traveler wandering through a hostile universe. You are the universe, looking at itself from a different angle, exploring its own possibilities through the illusion of being you. But illusions, like costumes, aren't bad. They're playful. They're creative. They're delightful when you know they're illusions. The trouble begins only when you start taking the costume as your skin, the role as your essence. This is why you can have everything and still feel nothing, because everything you've gathered is meant for the costume, not for the one who's wearing it. And the one who's wearing it doesn't need anything to complete itself. It is already whole, already overflowing, already rooted in the vastness of being. What it seeks is not possession, but recognition of its own depth. Feeling lost is the faint echo of that recognition beginning to stir. It's a signal that the play has become so convincing that the actor has mistaken himself for the character. And just as a good dream can suddenly become unsettling when you sense that something doesn't quite add up, the dream of being a separate self eventually begins to fray at the edges. The dissatisfaction seeps in not to torment you, but to invite you to wake up. Waking up doesn't require renouncing your possessions or abandoning your achievements. It simply requires seeing them as ornaments, not identity, gifts, not grounding, expressions, not definitions. The real grounding is the awareness that holds everything you experience, including the feeling of being lost. And the delightful paradox is that the moment you allow yourself to be lost, truly lost, without rushing to fix the feeling, you discover you're not lost at all. The path appears only when you stop insisting on a particular direction. The next step reveals itself only when you stop trying to control the whole journey. The river flows not because it knows the destination, but because flowing is its nature. You too are meant to flow. Somewhere in the middle of all this flowing, you realize that the sense of being lost was never about lacking direction. It was about clinging too tightly to one. A map can only show you where someone else has already been. But you are not here to retrace someone else's footsteps. You are here to walk a path that only you can walk, one that reveals itself only as you walk it. Trying to force a predetermined route through the wilderness of life is like insisting that a river obey the straight lines drawn on a city planner's blueprint. Rivers don't do that, and neither do souls, at least not without great suffering. Life invites you to loosen your grip on the wheel just enough to feel the river's current guiding you, not taking over for you, not sweeping you away, but cooperating with you. This is what the old philosophers meant by acting without forcing, moving with the dance instead of stomping on the rhythm. If you can sense that rhythm, even the slightest bit, it becomes very clear that feeling lost is actually a sign you are beginning to hear the music. Why would the universe bother giving you this uncomfortable nudge if everything was supposed to be perfectly satisfying at the surface? Perhaps because you're not meant to settle for surface-level living. You are not here to merely acquire things, check boxes, and reach milestones as if life were some cosmic to-do list. You're here to participate in the astonishing unfolding of awareness through this peculiar form you call me. And sometimes awareness needs to be shaken lightly from its slumber, so it can notice it's been sleepwalking. Think of those moments when you stare at the ceiling late at night, long after everyone else has fallen asleep. The room is quiet. Everything you've worked for is somewhere downstairs, neatly arranged. And yet something inside you asks, but why doesn't it feel like enough? This question is not an accusation. It's an invitation. It's the universe clearing its throat, suggesting gently that perhaps you've been looking for fulfillment in the wrong direction. Not outward, but inward. Not toward acquisition, but toward attention. Not toward becoming someone, but toward remembering the someoneness that was never lost to begin with. There's a subtle joy, almost a mischievous one, in discovering that the world outside, with all its glittering promises, was never actually the source of what you were seeking. It's rather like spending years polishing the windows of a house in the hope that the world outside will start to look brighter, only to eventually realize that the brightness comes from the light inside the house, not from the scenery beyond the glass. The glass was just frosted over with habit, expectation, and the noise of trying to be someone definitive. And that's another curious thing. The world tries very hard to convince you that you must be someone specific, successful, productive, admirable, strong, competent, spiritual. But life itself doesn't require any such performance. It only asks that you be present. The rest unfolds naturally. The problem is that presence is precisely what is missing when you are busy trying to maintain an identity. A role requires effort. A presence simply is. This is why all the everything you have does not satisfy, because it was gathered for the role, not for the presence. The role is always hungry. The presence is always full. When the role becomes heavy and the presence feels distant, the sense of being lost grows. But this is not a flaw. It is your inner intelligence, the same intelligence that beats your heart and orchestrates your breath, telling you that your identity has become too small for the vastness you actually are. You've tried to squeeze infinity into a resume. It's an impossible fit. But the moment you stop trying to define yourself, the moment you allow yourself to be spacious instead of certain, something remarkable happens. You no longer feel lost, because you are no longer insisting on being found. You begin to understand that the universe has never been about destinations. It's been a continuous improvisation from the very beginning. Stars explode, galaxies swirl, oceans rise and fall, forests grow and burn and grow again, and not once has the universe paused to ask, "Am I doing this right?" It simply unfolds, because unfolding is its nature. And you, whether you know it yet or not, are part of that unfolding. To feel lost is to momentarily forget that you are the unfolding itself, not a separate traveler who must chart a route across a foreign landscape. Once you embrace this, you find that you can walk into uncertainty with a kind of playful confidence. You don't need to know where you're going, to enjoy the journey. In fact, knowing too precisely where you're going often takes the wonder out of the whole affair. The greatest explorers, the ones who found the most beautiful places, both geographically and inwardly, were always the ones willing to step into the unknown. They carried curiosity instead of maps. And curiosity is the very antidote to feeling lost. When you're curious, being lost becomes an adventure rather than a crisis. The forest no longer feels like a maze. It becomes an invitation to discover hidden clearings. And often, the hidden clearing you discover is yourself. You find that beneath all the layers of roles and expectations, there is a kind of simple, spacious awareness that has never been confused, never been in doubt, never been lost for even a moment. It's been quietly watching your entire life, like a loving but amused friend, patiently waiting for you to notice it. When you do, you're struck by the realization that this awareness has no needs. It doesn't tremble at uncertainty. It doesn't cling to achievements. It doesn't fear dissolution. It simply is. And in that being, you find a peace no possession could ever provide. This peace is not the opposite of chaos, nor is it the absence of difficulty. It's the recognition that chaos and difficulty occur within a consciousness that remains undisturbed. Just as waves rise and fall on an ocean without harming the water itself, your experiences move within you without damaging what you fundamentally are. The moment this becomes more than an idea, when it becomes a felt experience, you stop trying to fix the feeling of being lost and instead begin to explore it. You let it guide you inward rather than outward. You start to enjoy the mystery instead of fearing it. And in that shift, the sense of being lost dissolves, not because you finally found the right path, but because you realized you are the path. And perhaps the greatest delight in all of this is discovering that nothing was wrong with you to begin with. Your confusion, your dissatisfaction, your longing, they were not signs of failure, but signs of growth, like the cracking of a shell just before the creature within emerges. Feeling lost was simply life's way of reminding you that you are not a finished product, but a living process, fluid, mysterious, ever unfolding. You feel lost only when you forget that you are not the character navigating the world, but the awareness in which the world appears. Once you remember this, even for a moment, the whole game becomes lighter. You can keep playing your role, earning your living, loving your people, decorating your life, but you do it with the playful ease of someone who knows it's all a magnificent performance, not a desperate search for completion. And when you live this way, something beautiful happens. Instead of clutching at life, you begin to dance with it. Instead of forcing meaning, you begin to feel meaning naturally. Instead of seeking yourself in outer achievements, you begin to recognize yourself in every breath, every sensation, every moment of awareness. You begin to feel, quite astonishingly, that you never needed to be found because you were never truly lost.
Let us be honest for a moment, painfully honest. By all outward appearances, this thing we call life is merely a flicker, a brief spark of light between two endless nights, and not even a peaceful day between them. For the more we allow ourselves to feel pleasure, the more open we are to pain. The more light we draw in, the darker the shadow that follows. And it is always there just behind the laughter, the triumph, the so-called joy. We have tried, through centuries of effort and imagination, to make sense of this, to give meaning to a flickering existence that ends in silence. And the only way we seem able to do this is by insisting there must be something more, some deeper layer, some grander plan behind the outward spectacle. Heaven, salvation, rebirth, destiny, call it what you will. We crave security not merely in this life, but beyond it. Because to accept the rawness of what is that life comes and goes without fixed reason, without guarantee, is a terrifying prospect. Now, I may not be forgiven for introducing such grave matters with a childish image, but the whole affair reminds me of something I tried to do when I was a boy. I wanted to send someone a parcel of water, not a bottle. I wished to tie up the water itself with paper and string. And of course, every time I tried, the result was a soggy mess. The water escaped, just as life slips through our fingers when we try to contain it. You see, human beings are rather brilliant at tying packages. We have built systems of belief, politics, morality, and metaphysics, carefully wrapped bundles of meaning, each attempting to hold the unholdable, name the unnameable. But no matter how clever the method, the package falls apart. The water bursts free. And the more our knowledge has grown, the more history we accumulate, the more facts we collect, the more aware we become, the more fragile these packages appear. They cannot contain the complexity. They cannot hold the flow. And so the modern mind finds itself in a peculiar state, flooded with information, but starving for meaning. We live in an age of extraordinary insecurity, not because the world is more dangerous than before, but because the anchors we use to cling to have unraveled. Traditions, religions, social roles, eternal truths, all questioned, all cast into doubt. Some celebrate this as a liberation. Others, understandably, find it disorienting, even terrifying. And most people live somewhere between the two, briefly exhilarated by freedom, then quietly overtaken by dread. For if nothing is fixed, if life is truly just change, just flow, just this present, then what becomes of hope? Hope, you see, is always aimed at the future. A better job, a longer life, a heaven after death. But if the future is as fluid as water, if there is no promised land awaiting us, what then? It seems, quite frankly, hopeless. And yet, we still chase. We chase happiness not in the present, but in the promise of what is to come. We say, just around the corner, then I'll be fulfilled. After this crisis passes, once I've found my purpose, when I retire, when I die. But the future, like the water in my childhood parcel, never quite arrives. And even when it seems to when the long-awaited day finally comes, we find it cannot be enjoyed unless it, too, carries the promise of another future beyond it. It's a cruel trick of the mind. To seek happiness in the future is to forever chase a mirage, a will-o'-the-wisp that disappears the moment you reach for it. And then in the end you vanish too. But understand this insecurity, this uncertainty, is not new. There has never been a time in human history where security was more than temporary, more than an illusion. Even in what we call the good old days, life was fragile. Death, disease, and disaster did not wait politely at the margins. What made life bearable then, however, was not certainty, but belief. Belief in God, in the soul, in eternal justice, things untouched by the calamities of the world. And while these beliefs may not have made life less precarious, they gave it shape. They gave it meaning. But now today, such convictions are harder to find. Even in churches and temples, even among the devout, there lingers doubt. Science has not only replaced religion in authority, it has stripped from us the comfort of myth. The scientist does not pretend to know what cannot be known, and in doing so reveals the vast, indifferent mystery of the cosmos. This honesty, admirable though it is, leaves the human heart famished. Because while the mind is satisfied with logic, the soul yearns for more. It wants purpose, direction, assurance that all of this matters. And when those assurances collapse, we look elsewhere. Political movements become our myths, social crusades become our meaning. We join collective efforts, not always because they are just, but because they give us a sense of being part of something larger, a sense that we are not alone in the dark. But you can feel it, can't you? The trembling underneath. For these are not certainties, but shouts in the night. And the louder we shout, the more fragile we reveal ourselves to be. So what happens to a mind, to a being, that can no longer believe? Not in fairy tales, but in any foundation at all. What becomes of the heart when all the old myths crumble and the new ones ring hollow? It begins to grasp. We turn inward, hoping to find permanence in ourselves, in our identities, our careers, our knowledge. We say, at least I am this, or at least I know that. But the truth, if you look just a little too long in the mirror, is that you are changing constantly, quietly, without your permission. The face, the thoughts, the tastes, the hopes, none of them stay. And so you clutch, you plan, you try to prepare, to fortify. You attempt, as all modern people do, to organize your life into a blueprint of safety. You build routines, set goals, make lists, meditate, track your calories, forecast your income, visualize success. You try, in every imaginable way, to manage the future. But no matter how precise the effort, the outcome never feels secure. Something always slips out of view. Some variable, some person, some emotion, some event ruins the equation. And you are back where you started, uncertain. And then here lies the rub. You blame yourself. You say, if only I had tried harder, planned better, prayed deeper, been more focused. But the real problem is not your failure. The problem is the game itself. Because you are chasing control in a world that is uncontrollable. You are searching for security in a realm that is defined by change. It is, as we said before, like trying to tie up water in a paper parcel. You get wet, you fail. You try again. And in that trying, in that reaching for a future that never arrives, you create your own suffering. Here is the paradox. The desire for security is the very thing that makes you feel insecure. The more you want to feel safe, the more you notice how unsafe things really are. The more tightly you grip the rope, the more your hands burn. In the act of resisting uncertainty, you become obsessed with it. And what you resist, you magnify. Fear breeds fear. Worry breeds more worry. To want safety, absolute, permanent safety, is to fight against the very nature of existence. Because the universe, you see, is not fixed. It dances, it flows. It erupts and collapses, sings and silences, all in rhythm without asking your permission. And so, when you demand that it pause for your comfort, you suffer. Because life will not hold still. It will not meet you in the future. It is already here. The mistake is in thinking you can stand apart from it, manage it, direct it from some imagined place of separateness. But you are not outside of life. You are not the observer looking in. You are in it. You are it. Just as a wave is not something separate from the ocean. It is the ocean momentarily expressing itself as a wave, so you are not separate from the universe, but the universe momentarily expressing itself as you. And the moment you see this, the need for security begins to dissolve. Because what could be more secure than this very moment, the only one that ever truly exists? So then, what is one to do? If life offers no final foothold, if beliefs fade, if plans crumble, if even the self turns to smoke under scrutiny, where does one stand? And the answer, though simple, is not easy. You stop standing. You stop seeking a ground. And you fall freely, openly, into the present. Not because the present moment is safe, but because it's the only thing that's real. You see, we have confused the idea of freedom with the power to control. We think we are free when we have mastery over the future, when we've eliminated risk, when the path is clear and marked. But that isn't freedom at all. That is fear wearing the mask of progress. Real freedom is far more wild. It's the surrender to the rhythm of life, to change, to death, to rebirth, not as things to overcome, but as the very texture of existence. Because in truth, you were never in control. There was never a separate you behind the eyes, managing the world like a ship from its helm. There is only awareness, witnessing, dancing, being. But as long as you try to cling to certainty, to permanence, to me, you will suffer. You suffer not because life is cruel, but because you want it to be something it is not. You want it to be solid, predictable, safe, and life, thank God, is none of those things. The very beauty of it all is in its impermanence. A cherry blossom is not less beautiful because it falls. The sun is no less radiant because it sets. So why do you imagine you must remain? Why do you fight to freeze the flowing water? The wisdom of insecurity is not some clever philosophy. It is a way of seeing, a return. It is the recognition that the moment you stop trying to secure your life is the moment it becomes alive. That in letting go of your need for answers, you begin to feel the mystery again. You were never meant to have it all figured out. The point was never to capture life, but to feel it. To live it as music, not as math. As dance, not direction. So, when you stop resisting change, when you no longer brace against the current, you find that the river was carrying you all along. You are not lost. You are not late. You are simply here. And here is enough. Now, perhaps the greatest illusion of all the root from which all this anxiety springs is the idea that you are separate from life. That you are a skin-encapsulated ego, tossed into a world not of your choosing, doing your best to survive, and hopefully to succeed. But who told you that? Where did you get this idea that there is a little you inside your head, pulling the levers and thinking the thoughts, directing the action like some spiritual CEO? You were taught it. You were told from the very beginning, you are you, and everything else is other. And so you've spent your life defending that boundary. But consider this, can there be a front without a back? Can you have a coin with only one side? You are not a stranger here. You are the universe, expressing itself briefly as a person. Just as a wave is not separate from the sea, you are not separate from the whole. The air you breathe, the thoughts you think, the heartbeat in your chest, these are not possessions, they are processes. Movements, the world happening through you. You don't beat your heart, you don't grow your hair, and you certainly don't choose your thoughts. They arise as clouds form and drift and dissolve. So when you let go of the idea of being someone in charge, what's left is not chaos but peace. The fear of death begins to dissolve because you see, there was never a fixed you to lose in the first place. So then how does one live, knowing that all things pass? You live as the tree lives, bending in the wind, rooted not in certainty, but in presence. You do not cling to the leaves, for you know they must fall. You do not beg the river to stop flowing, for its movement is its music. To love life truly is to love its change. To love without owning, to act without anxiety, to hold without grasping. You eat the fruit of the moment, you taste it fully, but you do not try to preserve the peel or frame the seed. This is not a call to apathy or passivity. No, quite the opposite. When you are no longer driven by fear, You begin to live with gentleness and with great power. You laugh more. You cry more easily. You touch the world more softly because you are no longer trying to conquer it. You are it. You see, living merely to await a brilliant tomorrow is the most refined way to steal one's own life. Imagine you're walking up an endless staircase. In Latin, gradius means step, and we call the years of schooling grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, then graduation, gradus, gradus, gradus. You climb and climb, as if each step were a promise of something greater. Finally, when you stand at the very top, perhaps as the chairman of a massive corporation, you suddenly feel a strange emptiness. You've conquered everything, but now what? There are no more steps to climb, and since you were never taught how to pause, to breathe, to feel this moment, you become lost in your own victory. Our education system, with all its seriousness and structure, never guides you on how to exist right in the breath of the present. It only trains you to postpone joy, to push everything into a vague future. Then one day, when you're exhausted from all those gradus, an insurance agent knocks on the door and whispers, "I have the perfect thing for you, a retirement plan. Just be patient until you're 65, when you leave the work grind, and you'll truly live, truly enjoy." Enjoy what? Exactly. With prostate pains, hormonal changes, dentures, and all the annoyances of old age. That's an empty promise, a way to extend the deferral of life. The art of living in the eternal moment, what people call now, is never taught in classrooms. Why? Because it's seen as irresponsible, lazy, lacking ambition. But listen, enjoying life isn't a luxury. It's the most basic human duty. If you don't learn how to do it, you'll become a burden to yourself and the world around you. You'll grow aggressive, seek to seize, manipulate others, turn into a power-mad tyrant, all because you haven't grasped the simple, cheap secret of being fully present in this second. In truth, sustaining a human life doesn't require that much energy. Think about it. How much food is enough? What do you wear to cover and warm yourself? How much space do you need to dwell? It all boils down to needs so basic, they're almost simplistic. And that simplicity opens the door to savoring the most refined things. Watching a raindrop slide down the window pane, feeling how it curves, how light refracts, how it merges with the world outside. That's a free performance, a masterpiece of the universe. But if you tell someone you're entranced by it, they'll shake their head. Are you crazy? Why not do something more important? More important here means what? It means causing disruption, intervening, progressing. We're indoctrinated with the idea that a person's value lies in changing the world, in pushing everything forward. We confuse natural growth, like trees growing, with progress as defined by humans. Without a grand project, without bustling activity, without future goals, you're labeled lazy, useless. But those who don't chase the future say, you're the crazy ones. You work to accumulate for a tomorrow that never comes, while we live fully today. Look at how a traditional Chinese person works. He labors just enough to have money, then stops, goes to a tea house, gambles a bit, smokes a pipe, or simply wanders admiring the scenery. We call that irresponsible, not maintaining the world properly. But perhaps that way of living is the true maintenance. Perhaps we, with our Protestant work ethic of ceaseless labor, with the belief that everything must be controlled, must progress, are the ones destroying the planet. We eradicate diseases, extend lifespans, but end up creating nuclear bombs to wipe it all out. That's the logical outcome of living for the future, promising forever, and when there's nothing left to promise, only destruction remains. Peoples untouched by the whirlpool of politics, Native American tribes, indigenous Mexicans, Africans, don't understand us, and we don't understand them, because they have no desire for what we call an ideal society. A few were convinced, like in Japan. They plunged into Western-style industrialization, and now cities like Nara, Osaka, Kobe are choked in smog, Tokyo a chaotic nightmare. They're reaping the consequences of chasing the illusion of the future. In the Hindu worldview, time is a cycle called yuga, starting from a golden age, then gradually declining, everything just unraveling over the ages. That's a reminder, escape the wheel of time, escape that rat race. This very idea underlies the political philosophy of redirection that I propose. Lead Western people out of history, out of the belief that we're in a process leading to something better forever. In reality, that process only leads to ever greater destruction. Live a timeless way of life, indefinite, far more appealing than a life devoted to time. Technology isn't the enemy. It brings the power to completely eliminate poverty. But if we view technology through the lens of history, as part of unending progress, it will fail. The distribution problem of wealth from technology isn't material, it's psychological. People are hypnotized by money, seeing it as having intrinsic value instead of just a symbol. Imagine a cosmic joke. Money, which we worship like a god, is really just numbers dancing in ledgers. Ramakrishna once said gold is one of humanity's great calamities, not because the metal shines, but because we mistake the symbol for reality. There's a funny story I like to retell. Long ago, banks around the world got tired of shipping physical gold across oceans, so they set up a central island in the Pacific. All the gold was gathered there, in a massive vault. For exchanges, they'd just push carts of gold down a short street between branches. Everything ran smoothly for a decade. Then one day, the bank owners brought their wives and kids to visit the island. Threw a grand party. They checked the books. Perfect. Finally, the kids clamored, "Dad, show us the gold." The vault managers started stammering, sweating. It's a bit difficult. It needs some preparation. The bank owner barked, "Nonsense. Show the kids the gold now." Finally, the truth came out. 7 years earlier, a submarine earthquake had swallowed the entire vault. But don't worry, they still recorded exactly how much gold each side owned in the books. So the gold was gone, but the value remained. On paper, we laugh uproariously, but that's exactly how the world works today. Money isn't gold, isn't resources, isn't real wealth, just promises, signs, collective magic. The US dollar prints. The United States government promises to pay $1. Pay with what? Another piece of paper. Money is debt, credit, packaged faith. The problem isn't lack of food, housing, clothing, technology produces in surplus. The problem is we're hypnotized by numbers on bank screens. We burn food in America while children starve in India, not because of shortage, but because the books don't balance. That's a refined form of madness. We can feed the whole planet, but let millions starve just for a symbol. The solution sounds equally mad. Reverse taxation. Instead of collecting from people, issue credit, but credit tied to actual total output, not phantom gold or empty promises. Then everyone can exchange what they create without monetary barriers blocking them. This isn't an economic issue. It's psychological. We're trapped in the illusion called Maya in Indian philosophy, the veil over reality. The future is part of that veil. We live as if tomorrow is when life really begins. Imagine you're a donkey with a fishing pole around your neck, a carrot dangling at the end right in front of your nose. You walk and walk, the carrot always there, always in reach, but never touched. That's the perfect image of modern man. We chase the future, chase retirement, chase when I'm rich then, when I retire then, when the kids are grown then, and when you finally bite the carrot, achieve the goal, you realize it's just a plastic fake, or worse, it's long withered. Classical Eastern people don't fall into this trap. They work just enough to live, then stop. They don't see work as life's purpose, but as a means. A Japanese blacksmith might spend the morning forging a blade, then the afternoon sitting watching cherry blossoms fall. We call that laziness. They call it living. When you're not obsessed with the future, you don't need infinite accumulation. You don't need a big house, fancy car, overflowing closet, because you don't use them to fill an inner void. That void can only be filled by presence, hearing leaves rustle, feeling the warmth of a teacup in your hand, smelling earth after rain. But our society is built on fear of scarcity. We're taught that if we don't accumulate, don't prepare, don't progress, we'll fall into misery. So we run forever, like hamsters on a wheel. And the wheel spins so fast we don't realize we're standing still. Technology advances, the wheel spins faster. We have washing machines, dishwashers, cars, planes, all to save time. Save time for what? To work more, earn more, buy more time savers. The perfect circle of meaninglessness. Meanwhile, A farmer in Bali might spend the day sitting under a coconut tree, watching waves crash. He has no insurance, no retirement fund, no 5-year plan. But he has what we've lost, peace in this moment. He doesn't wait for tomorrow to live, because he knows tomorrow is just a notion. Today is all he has, and today is enough. We need a revolution not in politics, not in economics, but in perception. Redirect people away from history, away from the story that we're progressing toward a future paradise. History is a linear tale, from primitive to civilized, from poverty to prosperity, from war to peace. But reality isn't linear. Reality is cyclical. Birth, dwelling, change, extinction. Every empire collapses. Every technology obsolesces. Every future promise vanishes. Only this moment is real. Technology can be a tool for liberation, if used right. Imagine, machines do all heavy work, automate food production, energy, housing. People don't need to work 8 hours a day. We could work 2 hours or nothing at all and still have enough. But for that to happen, we must abandon the illusion of money as a measure of value. We must abandon the belief that hard work is moral. We must learn to live without future goals. Now let's step together into an imaginary garden. Not a manicured Versailles type, but a wild garden where grass grows haphazardly, flowers bloom by season, and no one bothers to prune. Here, time isn't the enemy, it's a companion. A butterfly lands on a petal. You stop to watch, not to record or photograph, but just because it's happening. That's timeless living. No schedule, no destination, only presence. But this garden isn't far away. It's right in the breath you're taking, in the bird song outside the window, in the feel of your hand on the wooden table. Our society fears that garden. We're taught that without plans, goals, a mission, life is meaningless. Try telling your boss you want a day off to watch clouds drift. He'll think you've lost your mind. Try telling friends you don't need a promotion, a bigger house. They'll worry about your future. We're imprisoned in an invisible jail with bars made of promises. Just try a little harder and you'll be happy. But that little harder lasts a lifetime and happiness dangles out of reach. Look at how children play. A 3-year-old can spend hours stacking Lego, not to build the world's tallest tower, but for the joy of each brick clicking. It doesn't think about growing up to be an architect. It has no concept of wasted time. Then we adults step in and teach. Stop playing. Go study so you can succeed later. We strip away their wild garden, replace it with an industrial field, rows upon rows, straight, efficient, but soulless. We adults once had that garden too, but lost it. We replace natural joy with conditional joy. I'll be happy when I have a degree, when I have a partner, when I have a house, when I have kids, when I retire. Each time we achieve, we set a new condition. That's how the ego, hypnotized by time, operates. In Taoist philosophy, Lao Tzu said, "The one who knows enough is rich. Not rich from owning much, but rich from needing nothing more." The Taoist elder's garden is just a thatched hut, a pine tree, a stream. But he sits there, smiling at drifting clouds, feeling he owns the universe. Technology, used rightly, can return the garden to us. Imagine a world where robots plant rice, machines weave cloth, solar power provides free electricity. People don't work to live. They work if they want, or do nothing. A painter paints because colors move him. A musician plays because sounds make him alive. No one asks, how much does your art contribute to GDP? No one measures life's value in work hours. That's not far-fetched utopia. It's possible today if we dare abandon the illusion of earning a living. But to abandon, we must face the greatest fear, that if we don't run, we'll fall into the abyss, that if we don't accumulate, we'll starve, that if we have no goals, we'll be empty. These fears are nurtured from childhood. Study hard for a good job later, save so you don't suffer later, work hard to rest later, all based on the premise that the present isn't enough, that only the future is worthwhile. But what is the future? It's a notion, a ghost. When you reach that future, it's become the present, and you need a new future. In Zen, there's a famous koan. Before enlightenment, I chopped wood, carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood, carried water. Nothing changes outside, but everything changes inside.
Work is no longer a means to something. It is itself. Chopping wood is chopping wood. Carrying water is carrying water. Watching rain is watching rain. No, so that later. That's timeless living. Every action self-perfect, needing no reason beyond itself. Try a small experiment. For 10 minutes, do nothing. Just sit, breathe, look. No phone, no music, no thinking about to-do lists. At first you'll fidget. The brain will scream, wasting time, do something useful. But if you persist, a magical moment comes, stillness. You realize that without doing, you still exist, still complete. Those 10 minutes aren't lost. They're 10 minutes you truly lived. Our society doesn't teach this experiment. Schools teach math, literature, science, all aimed at later. No one teaches, today, sit still and feel your heartbeat. No one teaches, eat a bite of rice and really taste it. We're trained into efficient machines, but not into humans. The result? We can build rockets to Mars, but can't sit still for a minute without guilt. A friend once told me about his grandfather, a central Vietnamese farmer who only knew plowing fields, planting rice his whole life. No TV, no radio, no concept of retirement. Every evening he sat on the porch, smoked a water pipe, watched the moon, asked, "Do you have any dreams?" He laughed. "What are dreams? I have rice to eat, a place to sleep, the moon to watch. Enough." We laugh at his spiritual poverty. But perhaps we're the poor ones because we don't know enough. Technology can help us return to the garden, but only if we change our view. Instead of using machines to produce more, use them to need less. Instead of building factories for jobs, build parks for people to play. Instead of inventing apps to save time, invent ways for people to enjoy time. That's the real revolution. Not changing the outer world, but the inner. Imagine a morning without an alarm. No bell, no meetings, no urgent messages. You open your eyes, sunlight filters through leaves, and instead of jumping up, you lie there, listening to your own breath. That's not laziness. It's the first time in years you've allowed yourself to be here. Not so that later, not because I must earn a living, just be here. That moment isn't in a 5-year plan, not rated by KPIs, not needing social media posts. It's yours, and only yours. Now, scale that moment to a whole society. A society that no longer uses clocks to measure human value. A society where schools teach kids to watch clouds instead of competing for grades. A society where occupation isn't a business card, but how you choose to express joy. A baker bakes because he loves the smell of rising dough. A storyteller tells because she loves kids' eyes lighting up. No one asks, "What's your salary?" But, does it make you come alive? Sounds fanciful? Actually, we have all the tools to make it real today. Automated agriculture can feed 8 billion with land smaller than a province. Solar, wind, geothermal can provide unlimited power without bills. 3D printers can create homes, clothes, tools in hours. The problem isn't scarcity, but distribution. And distribution is stuck in the money maze. Money is no longer a medium of exchange. It's become the end. We work for money, use money to buy time, then work to make up lost time. The perfect circle of madness. Break the circle with a simple idea. Universal credit tied to real output. Everyone gets enough credit to live comfortably. Not to be rich, but to be free. This credit doesn't accumulate. No interest, no debt. It's created corresponding to actual goods and services society produces. Want bread? Yes. Want a house? Yes. Want to learn painting? Yes. No one has to earn it by selling 8 hours of life daily. Work becomes choice, not obligation. An engineer might spend 3 months on clean energy research, then 6 months fishing. A teacher might teach in winter, wander admiring flowers in summer. No one gets fired for inefficiency. Efficiency is measured by joy, not profit. But for this to happen, we must abandon 2 great illusions. 1, the future is where we'll live. 2, money is the measure of value. The first illusion we've discussed much. The future is the carrot on the stick. When you get there, it's past, and you need a new carrot. The second is subtler. We believe a piece of paper, a screen number, has power to decide who eats, who sleeps, who lives. But money is just collective belief. If the world agrees a seashell is money, it is. If the world agrees universal credit is fair, it will be. The problem isn't technical. It's that we haven't dared to believe. Try a thought experiment. Suppose tomorrow all money vanishes. No dollars, euros, yen. Only goods. Rice, cloth, houses, cars. What do? You barter. I give you a sack of rice. You give me a meter of cloth. I fix your roof. You teach my kid math. We'd quickly realize value lies in actions, not symbols. Money is just simplifying exchange at scale. But when scale distorts reality, when someone starves beside a granary because no money, it's no longer a tool, but chains. Technology can replace those chains with direct exchange. Blockchain, AI, IoT sensors can track real output and distribute credit instantly. No central banks, no governments taxing. Everyone has a digital wallet tied to basic needs. Want more? Create value, not by working hard, but by doing what you love. A good song, a joke, a beautiful garden, all value. AI calculates and distributes. No one richer from hoarding, no one poorer from laziness. Wealth becomes ability to enjoy, not to own. In that world, retirement ceases to exist, because no one works waiting to retire. Kids don't learn for jobs, but to understand the world. Elders aren't shoved into nursing homes, but invited to tell stories under trees. Artists don't starve because market doesn't need. Scientists don't beg grants to prove economic benefit. Everyone does because that's how they breathe. And when we no longer run, we'll discover a secret. Time isn't a resource, but space to live. Each moment is a small universe. Watching dew on a leaf isn't entertainment. It's meditation. Hearing music isn't pastime. It's communion with the infinite. Eating a meal isn't fueling. It's a ritual thanking earth and sky. When you live like that, you don't need rest because you've never worked in the old sense. You just are. Finally, return to the wild garden. The butterfly still lands on the flower. Clouds still drift. You sit there, no reason, no purpose. And in that moment, you realize this isn't a break between tasks. This is humanity's real work, presence. All the gradius, all the promises, all the carrots.
There is beneath all our cleverness a quiet faculty that no machine can mimic. It is the art of listening to what is not being said. When you step into a room, something stirs long before language begins. You can sense who holds the center of gravity, who hides behind a polite expression, who aches to be seen without daring to say so. This is not analysis. It is awareness, older than the mind itself. It is the body knowing before the mind interferes. Modern life teaches us to speak quickly, to think sharply, to fill every silence with words. But the more noise we make, the more we lose the subtle music underneath it all. Social intelligence is not the power to persuade or impress. It is the quiet attunement to the living current flowing between human beings. When you move from this stillness, others do not merely hear you, they resonate with you. For connection is not made through speech, but through the shared silence beneath it. Most of what passes between human beings is never spoken. The real conversation happens in the pauses, in the soft currents that flow beneath the surface of words. Think of a moment when someone said, "I'm fine," but you felt they weren't. No evidence, no argument, just a quiet knowing in your chest. Or the way a friend's silence felt heavier than any explanation could be. This is where social intelligence lives. Not in clever speeches, but in the spaces between them. We've built a culture that worships language. The louder, the sharper, the better. We teach people to talk, but seldom to listen. And when silence arrives, most grow restless, as though something essential has gone missing. But silence isn't absence. Silence is the ground from which real connection grows. Words are like ripples on water. They reveal movement, but the depth is felt below. When you learn to sense beneath words, you begin to hear the tremor behind a laugh, the hesitation before a yes, the small griefs tucked inside ordinary sentences. To be socially intelligent is to allow yourself to feel these undercurrents without rushing to fix or explain them. It's to be present enough for another person to exhale, not because you solved their problem, but because they finally felt understood. Real connection doesn't happen in speeches. It happens in the quiet recognition that two human beings are breathing the same moment. To move with grace among others, one must first learn the quiet art of knowing oneself. Social intelligence is not a mask you wear to impress. It begins with the stillness within you, the inner compass. When you are at odds with your own emotions, everything outside becomes distorted. A simple look may feel like judgment, a silence like rejection. But when you begin to understand your own tides, anger, fear, longing, joy, you no longer drown in them, you float. And from that calm water, it becomes possible to see others clearly. Emotional intelligence is that inner compass. It's the ability to feel a storm inside without being swept away. But a compass alone is not enough. A sailor who never looks outward will lose the shore. Social intelligence is the map, the ability to navigate the subtle landscapes of other hearts. Every person carries their own weather. Some arrive like sunlight, others like quiet rain. When your inner compass is steady, you can sense their changing skies without confusing them for your own. You begin to notice the tremor in someone's breath, the way their words don't always match their eyes. And rather than reacting, you respond. This is the balance, to know where you stand within and to walk gently in the world without. One keeps you anchored, the other lets you travel far. To read another person is not to pry into them, nor to decode them like a puzzle. It is to stand quietly at the edge of their being and allow yourself to feel the ripples they make in the world. Most people imagine communication as something that happens through words, but the body speaks long before the mouth does. A slight tightening around the eyes, the way someone inhales before answering, the small delay before a smile, all these are little doorways into the unspoken. And you don't need special training to notice them. You only need to stop rushing past what is already there. We live in an age that values quick answers, fast replies, and clever remarks. But the art of reading people belongs to a slower rhythm. It happens when you allow your mind to quiet, your eyes to soften, your presence to stretch beyond your own thoughts. And in that stillness, something extraordinary occurs. People begin to reveal themselves, not because you force them to, but because they feel seen. They feel you're listening. To read people is not to control or manipulate. It's to listen with the whole of your being. To notice when a voice trembles, but the words remain strong. To sense when a silence is tender and when it is full of pain. You don't interpret them, you meet them. The moment you truly see another person, not through the fog of your own judgments, but through quiet attention, something shifts in the air between you. It's almost invisible, like the faint change in temperature before rain. This is where trust begins. Not in grand gestures or elaborate promises, but in the simple human recognition. I am being felt. I am not alone in here. People don't trust because of what you say. They trust because, for a brief moment, they sense that their inner world has been noticed without being handled. It is the rare experience of being understood without being interrupted. This kind of presence is not decoration, it's foundation. When someone feels seen at this level, defenses soften. The walls they spent years building loosen, even just a little. And from that quiet opening, trust begins to take root. Not as an agreement, but as a shared silence between two human beings. Trust is a strange thing. You cannot demand it, you cannot force it, and you cannot bargain for it. It grows the way dawn arrives, slowly, without announcement. Real influence does not belong to the loudest voice in the room, but to the presence that others feel is steady. You've seen it before. Someone speaks softly, and yet the room listens. Not because their words are dazzling, but because people can sense something beneath them. A quiet ground, a sincerity that asks for nothing. Social intelligence isn't about persuading people to bend to your will. It is the art of becoming someone others feel safe to open their world to. Trust is built not through clever arguments, but through the simple consistency of presence. When you truly listen, not to reply, not to prove, but simply to be there, people recognize it immediately. It touches something older than logic. It says, I see you, I'm not here to fix you, I'm here to be with you. And from that trust, influence flows on its own. Not as pressure, but as gravity. Gentle, invisible, effortless. A tree does not convince you of its shade. You simply walk toward it because it stands where it has always stood. So it is with trust. Influence is not the storm. It is the still air that gathers people without a word. Long before we learn to speak, we learn to feel one another. Long before we built cities and systems, we gathered around firelight, reading the flicker in someone's eyes more easily than the words that came after. Connection is not a modern skill. It is the oldest language we share. The rhythm of another's breath, the tremor in their voice, the heaviness or lightness of their silence. Your body knows how to read this. It always has. It is not something you learn so much as something you remember. Modern life often makes us forget. We build walls of analysis, of speed, of distraction. But beneath it all, your nervous system is still listening, still tuning itself to the quiet music between people. When someone is in pain, a part of you aches. When someone laughs, something in you softens. This isn't sentimentality. It is the design of being human. We are wired to connect the way trees lean toward light. And when you allow yourself to trust that instinct, to sense before you speak, to feel before you explain, your interactions become less about control and more about attunement. In that space, conversation turns into something older than language. Two beings remembering they were never truly separate. We live in an age where noise has become the default setting. Not just the restless noise of the world, but the chatter inside the mind that never seems to rest. Everyone is speaking. Few are listening. And in that endless exchange of words, presence is lost. Presence isn't a performance. It isn't about perfect posture, nodding at the right time or pretending to be calm. It's the art of being here fully, without rehearsing what comes next. You felt it before. When someone looks at you, not past you. When their attention doesn't wander. When you feel in the marrow of your being that in this moment you don't have to explain yourself. Their silence is not empty. It is spacious. In a world so addicted to distraction, presence has become rare and therefore powerful. It slows the rhythm of conversation. It turns noise into music. It allows the small, quiet truths in people to rise to the surface without being drowned out. Machines may outthink us, but they cannot be with us. They cannot offer the kind of stillness that makes another human exhale. Presence is not something you build. It's something you stop covering up. And when you offer that kind of space to others, they recognize it immediately. Not with their intellect, but with their soul. What binds us most deeply is rarely spoken. The most honest conversations are carried in the eyes, in the tilt of the head, in the rhythm of a breath shared between two people who need not explain themselves. Empathy isn't a technique. It is the simple act of standing beside another human being without rushing to correct or repair their experience. It is the art of feeling with, not fixing for. When someone is grieving, words often fall short, but a steady hand, a soft gaze, or a quiet presence can speak with a language older than speech itself. We often imagine that influence comes from great speeches or brilliant arguments, yet more often it comes from the silent way we meet another person's heart. To be empathetic is not to drown in another's feeling. It is to let your presence become wide enough to hold it gently, as a river holds the reflection of the moon, without grasping, without claiming, without needing to change it. But empathy without ground becomes a flood. If you lean too far into another's storm, you may lose your footing. And when that happens, compassion turns to confusion, listening turns to reaction. This is where many people falter, not because they don't care, but because they haven't yet learned to stand firm in the winds they invite. To offer true presence is not to carry someone else's pain as your own. It is to hold space for it without becoming it, like a tree that bends but does not break. And it is in these moments, when emotions grow heavy, that the quiet art of emotional mastery begins. Not as control, but as a return to center. From empathy, we step gently into strength. Conflict in itself is not the enemy. It is simply a moment when two worlds meet and neither wishes to disappear. Most people treat conflict as a battlefield, rushing to defend their position, to prove themselves right. But the wise approach it as a mirror. What unsettles us in another often touches something unsteady within ourselves. When anger rises, when pride stiffens the spine, when the voice grows sharp, that is not the moment to conquer the other. It is the moment to return to stillness. Emotional mastery does not mean suppressing feeling. It means meeting it like an old friend who has come to deliver a message. If you can remain steady, when your chest tightens, when your breath grows shallow, you will find that conflict loses its teeth. Your stillness becomes the calm center around which the storm turns. And from this place, listening returns. The other person no longer feels they are fighting against you, but being heard by you. And when listening enters a room, truth becomes possible again. To master emotion is not to harden against life. It is to stand in its waves without losing your balance. When one of you remains anchored, the quarrel slowly remembers its humanity. And what began as tension becomes an opening. What follows is not victory or defeat, but quiet. The air between you no longer strains under the weight of opposing wills. It loosens. A calm begins to shape itself in the space where resistance once lived. This is the quiet strength that does not need to announce itself. When you remain steady in the storm, you become something people lean toward without quite knowing why. It isn't about being wiser or stronger. It's about not leaving yourself. Others may raise their voices, their defenses, their fears, but your stillness does not mirror their storm. like the riverbank beside a rushing current. You give shape to the moment without trying to control the water. In that kind of presence, something in the other person begins to settle too. People rarely remember arguments in detail, but they remember how they felt when they stood near someone who did not fight them back. Safety is not a speech. It's a felt thing, quiet, wordless, and unmistakable. To become a safe space is not to fix others. It is simply to be a place where their walls can rest, where their breath can drop a little lower into the body. And when you carry that steadiness into the world, you stop trying to win people over. They come closer on their own. True social intelligence is not a set of tricks or polished performances. It is not how well you speak, how charming you sound, or how quickly you think. It is the quiet art of being so fully yourself that others feel free to be themselves too. All the techniques, reading people, building trust, mastering emotion, they are only different doors that lead back to the same place, presence. The presence that listens more than it explains. The presence that steadies rather than reacts. The presence that does not need to win to be strong. When people leave your company, they will not replay your perfect sentences. They will remember how they felt around you, whether they could breathe a little easier, whether they felt seen, whether they felt safe. And that is the real power here, not to shine above others, but to become a space where they no longer need to defend themselves. Social intelligence is not learned in books alone. It is remembered in the silence between words, in the calm between storms, in the stillness you carry inside. When you embody that, you no longer need to try to connect. Connection happens on its own.
You see, when we speak of awakening, we often imagine that something extraordinary must happen to us, a blinding revelation, a sudden insight that transforms the ordinary world into some kind of mystical vision. But awakening is not something you acquire, not something you can chase or earn. It is, in fact, the recognition that there was never anything to gain. The strange paradox is that when you stop trying to become awakened, you realize you already are. But, of course, saying that to a person still caught in the game of seeking sounds like nonsense. They want to know how, what to do, what step to take, and yet every step you take to find it only takes you further away, because you are moving in the wrong direction toward effort, toward the future, toward the illusion that there is somewhere to get to. Most of our lives are organized around that illusion. From the moment we begin to think of ourselves as someone, we are told that we must improve, advance, refine, and control. We measure our value by what we can obtain: more money, more knowledge, more love, more approval. Even our spiritual pursuits are infected by this disease of acquisition. We want enlightenment, like we want a new car or a diploma. We imagine that there's a ladder reaching to heaven, and all we need to do is climb faster than the rest. Yet every rung of that ladder is made of smoke, and the higher we go, the less real it all becomes. What awakening reveals is that there is no ladder, no top, no bottom, only the ever-present ground beneath your feet. When one truly awakens, one does not gain new powers or visions. One gains nothing, but in that nothing, everything changes. It is like waking from a dream in which you believed you were starving, and suddenly realizing that the hunger was only part of the dream. The food you were chasing was never real, yet you, the dreamer, remain. The great secret is not that you become something different, but that you cease to need to become anything at all. What you gain is not more content in your life, but the quiet recognition of what was always there. Now, of course, our minds don't like that kind of simplicity. We think, surely it can't be that easy. We are addicted to struggle. We believe meaning comes from difficulty, That peace must be earned by effort. That wisdom must be bought with suffering. So when someone tells us that the truth is already present, that we are already free, we think it must be a trick. And so we continue searching, reading books, attending retreats, analyzing our thoughts, all the while overlooking the simple fact that the search itself is the barrier. To seek truth is to affirm its absence, just as to chase happiness is to admit you are unhappy. Awakening is the end of that chase. Imagine, for a moment, a man standing in the middle of a clear pond, frantically scooping at the water with his hands in an attempt to find what he already stands upon. He disturbs the reflection, splashing about, growing more and more frustrated. And then, suddenly, exhausted, he stops. The water settles. The reflection returns. He sees the sky mirrored perfectly beneath him. That moment of stillness, that surrender, is awakening. Not a reward for effort, but the result of exhaustion, the exhaustion of the self that seeks. So, what do you gain when you awaken? You gain the loss of what was never real. You lose the burden of trying to be someone. You gain the simplicity of being no one in particular. You lose the anxiety of time, the endless pushing towards some imagined tomorrow, and you gain the immediacy of this moment. It's not that life suddenly becomes perfect. You still get hungry, tired, lonely. You still laugh, cry, and make mistakes. But the difference is that it all happens within a vast sense of okayness. The storm still rages, but you are no longer in the storm. You are the sky that contains it. The tragedy of modern life is that we are taught to identify with the storm. We say, I am sad, I am angry, I am lost, but these are only passing clouds. You are not your thoughts any more than the ocean is its waves. When one awakens, one doesn't destroy the waves, one simply stops mistaking them for the sea. You realize that behind every rise and fall, there is a quiet stillness that never changes. And from that stillness, life moves effortlessly. You might ask, well then, if I am already this awareness, why don't I feel it? The answer is simple. You are looking for it as though it were an object. You imagine awareness as something that can be experienced, when in fact, it is the very condition for experience itself. You cannot see your own eyes without a mirror, and you cannot perceive awareness as though it were apart from you. So, in our endless attempts to observe, analyze, and define ourselves, we create more mirrors, more reflections, more distortion. But the truth was never hiding. It was simply overlooked because it was too close. That's why, when people awaken, they often laugh. Not because they've discovered something new, but because they realize how absurdly simple it has always been. It's as if you've been tearing the house apart looking for your glasses, only to find them perched on your nose. The laughter is the sound of the mind collapsing into humility. It realizes it can't grasp what it is trying to hold, because it itself is the thing being held. And so, awakening is not an achievement. It is not the result of discipline or purity or perfection. It is the relaxation of the very effort to reach it. In that relaxation, you discover what was always here, the unshakable presence of being itself. And once that realization dawns, you cannot lose it, because it was never gained. You cannot unsee what has been seen. You cannot unknow the truth that you are the very thing you were seeking. The only thing you can lose is the illusion that you were ever separate from it. Of course, awakening doesn't make you superhuman. You don't float about in a permanent state of bliss. Rather, you become profoundly ordinary. You can drink tea, take a walk, wash the dishes, and yet everything shimmers with a quiet luminosity. The sound of water, the feeling of sunlight, the laughter of a friend, all are sacred, not because they belong to some higher world, but because you finally see them as they are. You stop dividing life into sacred and profane, spiritual
and mundane. You realize it was all one dance, one motion, one eternal now. And this is what awakened people gain: not detachment from life, but intimacy with it. They no longer hold themselves apart, judging, comparing, calculating. They are immersed, but not entangled. They act, but without the tension of control. They love, but without possession. They experience pain, but without resistance. The gain is a kind of effortless participation. It is the freedom to be fully human, without pretending to be divine, and yet knowing that the divine was never anywhere else. In our culture, we confuse awakening with escape. We think it means to transcend the human condition, to rise above suffering, to be beyond error. But true awakening is not escape, it is inclusion. It is saying yes to everything, even the parts you once rejected. It is realizing that the darkness, the confusion, the doubt are not mistakes to fix, but aspects of the whole to embrace. You see, the moment you stop trying to edit existence, you discover its perfection. You realize that everything you tried to push away was, in its own way, necessary for the dance to continue. This realization brings a deep compassion, for when you no longer judge yourself for being flawed, you no longer judge others for being asleep. You see them as you once were, caught in the same beautiful confusion, dreaming the same dream of control and separation. And so, instead of trying to wake them up, you simply love them. You let them be, because you understand that even their struggle is part of awakening. After all, you cannot wake from a dream you've never had. As you awaken, what you gain is not certainty, but trust. The old craving for answers dissolves, replaced by a quiet confidence that you don't need them. You no longer demand that the universe explain itself. You live as the question, open, alive, curious. You no longer seek security in belief or identity. You rest in the unknown and find that it holds you. What you gain is not knowledge, but wisdom, the kind that doesn't cling to conclusions. And what's most surprising is how utterly simple life becomes. You see, simplicity is not the absence of complexity, but the absence of conflict. When the self stops arguing with reality, everything falls into harmony. You no longer feel divided between what is and what should be. You stop rehearsing your life and begin to live it. You stop analyzing your feelings and begin to feel them. You stop searching for love and discover you are its source. This simplicity cannot be taught through philosophy. It has to be seen. It's like a mirror that reflects everything but holds on to nothing. The awakened person moves through life like that, reflecting, responding, dancing, yet untouched by the passing images. They have not withdrawn from life. They are more alive than ever, because they no longer resist it. So the great gain of awakening is the loss of struggle. The gain is the peace that comes when you stop trying to fix the world and instead allow it to unfold. The gain is the return to innocence, the unlearned trust of a child who plays without purpose, loves without calculation, and cries without shame. To awaken is to rediscover that innocence in the heart of wisdom, to see with clear eyes and still say yes to it all. And so, my friends, what you gain when you awaken is not something you can hold, not something you can show or prove. You gain a way of being, a way of seeing, that transforms every ordinary act into a miracle. You gain the silence between thoughts, the stillness beneath movement, the presence within absence. You gain yourself not as an object, but as the ungraspable awareness that has always been here, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to notice. And when you begin to see this clearly, something very gentle starts to happen to your relationship with life. You stop treating it as a problem to solve, and you start listening to it like you might listen to music. You notice that each moment has its own melody, its own texture, and that you are not standing apart from it. You are the very rhythm itself, moving and changing, rising and falling, breathing in and out. To live awakened is to live musically, not mechanically. It's to sense that everything that happens, no matter how apparently chaotic, fits perfectly into the larger harmony. The mind, of course, will protest. It wants to hold on, to define, to plan. It will say, yes, but what about tomorrow? What about my responsibilities, my dreams, my losses? And the answer, you see, is not to reject those concerns, but to notice that they too are part of the music. The melody includes the dissonance, the unresolved chords, the tension that makes the release so beautiful. Without them, the song would be flat and lifeless. The awakened person does not demand that life always sounds sweet. They understand that even the sour notes belong to the composition. This changes how you relate to suffering. You begin to see that pain, fear, confusion, they are not punishments, nor signs that you've done something wrong. They are movements in the great symphony of existence. And when you stop resisting them, they transform. You see the difference between pain and the resistance to pain. Pain simply arises and passes. Resistance lingers, echoing, amplifying, creating stories. The more you fight it, the deeper it digs in. The moment you allow it, the moment you say yes to even this, it begins to dissolve. Awareness itself is the cure. Now, there is something profoundly tender about that discovery, because for the first time, you stop running away from yourself. You no longer divide your inner world into good and bad, acceptable and shameful. You see that the parts you once rejected were never enemies at all. They were lost children waiting to be seen. And so, you stop trying to purify yourself into some ideal version of a spiritual being, and you begin to love the human one instead. You begin to understand that the divine expresses itself precisely through imperfection. The crack in the bowl is what allows the light to shine through. And as you grow into that understanding, something unexpected emerges humor. You begin to laugh at the whole cosmic joke. You laugh at how serious you once were, how desperately you tried to be enlightened, how tightly you clung to the very ideas that kept you trapped. You laugh because you see the absurdity of trying to control what was never yours to control. You laugh, and in that laughter, the walls collapse. The divine play, the Leela, as they call it in Sanskrit, becomes obvious. The world is not a machine grinding toward an end. It's a dance of energy, endlessly creating and dissolving itself, and you are both the dancer and the dance. When you awaken to that, the quality of your relationships also changes. You no longer approach others as instruments to your happiness. You see them as reflections of yourself, not metaphorically, but literally. You realize that there is only one awareness appearing as many points of view. So when you meet another person, you are meeting a different expression of the same being. This recognition gives rise to an effortless compassion. You no longer need to forgive because there is nothing left to accuse. You no longer need to prove because there is nothing to defend. You relate from a space of quiet understanding, free of demand. And yet, this doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. You still speak truth, you still act, you still set boundaries when necessary, but you do it without hatred, without the need to conquer or justify. Your actions arise like waves from the ocean, spontaneous, appropriate, alive. You respond instead of reacting. You participate instead of controlling. And in that way, every interaction becomes sacred, because it is no longer about getting something. It's about recognizing what's already shared. Many people imagine that awakening makes life easier, but in truth, it simply makes it real. You still face loss, illness, conflict, disappointment. The difference is that you no longer interpret these as personal failures. You see them as part of the unfolding. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin to ask, what is this showing me? The awakened person doesn't avoid storms. They learn to dance in the rain, because the rain is also part of the song. In this openness, your sense of time begins to shift. You notice that the past and the future are no longer as heavy as they once were. They appear like faint ripples across the vast stillness of now. You realize that what you called past is just memory arising in the present, and what you call future is imagination appearing here too. Everything is happening now, and this now has no edge. It is infinite, boundless, ungraspable. You stop trying to live in the moment, because you see there is nothing outside of it. The idea of living in the present becomes redundant. You are the present. When that realization dawns, anxiety begins to fade. Because anxiety always depends on time. It depends on imagining a future you must prepare for or a past you must fix. Without that timeline, fear loses its foundation. You find a quiet confidence that whatever arises will be met when it comes. You no longer need to prepare for life because you are life. And this brings with it a kind of softness, a grace. You stop pushing so hard. You stop running so fast. You start to trust the natural intelligence that beats your heart, that breathes your lungs, that turns night into day without your permission. This trust is what many traditions call faith. But it's not faith in a concept or a distant deity. It's faith in the living reality of existence itself. You begin to notice how everything works together in mysterious balance, the way pain deepens compassion, the way endings give rise to beginnings, the way loss opens space for renewal. You see that you don't need to understand it all. You can rest in the mystery, because the mystery is not against you, it is you. This resting brings about a deep stillness, even in motion. You can be busy yet peaceful, involved yet free. You no longer need to withdraw to find silence. The silence is within you wherever you go. It's the silence between the notes, the space that allows the music to be heard. The awakened person doesn't reject the world, they listen to it differently. They hear the divine rhythm in traffic noise, in children's laughter, in their own heartbeat. Everything becomes a kind of meditation, not because they are trying to be mindful, but because they can no longer help it. And gradually, a shift occurs in your motivation. You stop living to prove yourself, to accumulate, to win. You live because living itself is the play of existence. You work, you rest, you create, not out of fear or ambition, but out of the sheer joy of participation. You become like an artist painting without needing to finish the picture, knowing that the act of painting is the beauty itself. You stop striving for purpose, because you see that life doesn't have one in the way you imagined. Life is not a journey toward meaning, it is the meaning. And the more you try to impose meaning on it, the more it slips away. So what you gain when you awaken is the freedom to live without needing a reason. You are no longer driven by the anxious question of what am I supposed to do? You do what feels alive, and that aliveness becomes your compass. You realize that meaning is not found, it is expressed. Every moment you live authentically, every breath you take in awareness, is meaning itself unfolding. The awakened life is not a life of answers, but of pure response, spontaneous, creative, full of wonder. And in this simplicity, something miraculous happens. You begin to fall in love with everything. Not a sentimental love, not an emotional clinging, but a deep appreciation for the astonishing fact that anything exists at all. You walk through the world as if seeing it for the first time. The light on water, the sound of footsteps, the scent of rain, each becomes a portal to the infinite. You realize that existence doesn't need improvement. It needs only to be seen. To awaken is to see. But this seeing is not separate from doing. It's not the lazy detachment of someone who says it's all an illusion. It's the vivid engagement of someone who says it's all alive. You live fully because you no longer fear loss. You give fully because you no longer fear lack. You die to each moment, gladly, because you know you will rise in the next. That is what makes the awakened life so radiant. It's not an escape from death, but a dance with it. And this brings us to one of the greatest paradoxes. The awakened person gains the ability to lose completely. They are not afraid of endings because they know there are none. Every ending is just the beginning of another form. Just as a wave falls back into the sea only to rise again, you see that what you truly are cannot be diminished. What you gain when you awaken is the understanding that loss itself is part of wholeness, that even disappearance is a kind of presence. And so you stop hoarding moments. You stop clinging to experiences, people, even memories. You learn the art of letting things pass through you. You become transparent, like glass, allowing light to move freely. You are no longer heavy with the weight of what was or what could be. You are light, fluid, open. You are, in every sense, free. And it is in that freedom that the deepest joy emerges, not the fleeting happiness that depends on conditions, but the uncaused joy that arises simply because you are. It is not a joy that needs to shout. It hums quietly beneath all things. You feel it when you breathe, when you watch a bird take flight, when you smile for no reason. It is the joy of being itself, which cannot be taken, cannot be taught, cannot be lost. That, my friends, is the gain that never fades, the gain that was never earned, the gain that was always yours. When you begin to live from this space, you find that the whole experience of being human becomes lighter. Not easier in the sense of less demanding, but lighter in spirit. You can carry the same burdens as before, but they no longer weigh upon you in the same way. The heaviness was never in the burden itself. It was in the illusion that you were carrying it alone. The moment you see that you are the life that carries itself, the burden dissolves. Effort still exists, but the strain disappears. It is like dancing. The steps may be complex, but when you let the rhythm guide you, it no longer feels like work. Now you might say, but what about my responsibilities? What about the real challenges of life? And of course they remain. But the difference is that you meet them from a different place. You respond not from fear or obligation, but from clarity. When the mind is no longer clouded by anxiety and control, wisdom arises naturally. You see what needs to be done, and you do it without the constant commentary of self-judgment. Life moves through you with its own intelligence. You become, as it were, an instrument that plays itself. This is why the awakened person seems calm even amidst chaos. It's not that they are numb or detached. On the contrary, they feel everything more vividly than ever before. But because they no longer identify with every passing thought or emotion, they are not drowned by them. Emotions come and go like weather over the landscape, but the sky itself remains untroubled. You become that sky, and once you see yourself as the sky, you stop trying to control the clouds. You let them drift, you let them rain, you let them shine, and everything finds its place. You might notice, too, that your sense of identity begins to loosen. You no longer cling so tightly to the story of who you think you are. You stop being so certain about what defines you, because you realize that identity is not fixed. It's a process, a dance of appearances. One moment you are a teacher, another a friend, another a stranger passing by. And all these roles, though temporary, are expressions of the same consciousness. You don't have to pick one and make it permanent. You can be all of them and none of them at once. That is true freedom. It's a curious thing, but when you stop taking yourself so seriously, the universe begins to reveal its sense of humor. You start to see how the grand drama of human existence is, in a way, a play. Each of us plays our part, the hero, the fool, the lover, the skeptic, and the beauty of it is that the roles keep changing. The trouble begins when we forget it's a play. When we start believing we are the mask, we suffer. But the moment you remember, you can laugh again. You can enjoy the performance, even when it's tragic, because you know the essence behind it is untouchable. This is what many spiritual traditions mean when they talk about detachment. It's not coldness or indifference. It's the warmth of knowing that you are safe even when things appear to fall apart. You can let the waves crash because you know you are the ocean. You can let the story twist and turn because you know you are the storyteller. And once you understand that, fear loses its grip entirely. For how can the ocean be afraid of the wave? How can the storyteller be afraid of the plot? From that space, love takes on a new dimension. It's no longer a transaction, no longer a search for completion. It becomes a natural state of being. You love not because of what you get, but because that is what life does when it knows itself. You find yourself moved by compassion not out of duty, but out of recognition. You see yourself in everything, in the stranger's eyes, in the trembling leaf, in the child's laughter, in the grief of loss. Love becomes as effortless as breathing. And this love cannot be lost because it was never dependent on conditions. It flows because you exist. And then comes the greatest paradox of all. The more you surrender your life, the more alive you feel. The more you release your need to control, the more powerful you become. Because power, in its truest sense, is not domination, it's alignment. It's the power of the river that moves mountains, not by force, but by persistence. The awakened person is like that river. They don't fight obstacles, they flow around them. They don't resist change, they become change. They move with such ease that what once seemed impossible now happens effortlessly. That is the gain that can never be lost, the power that comes from no longer needing to be powerful. And as you live in this way, you begin to see that everything that happens, even what seems terrible or senseless, fits perfectly into the whole. You stop asking, why me? And begin to ask, why not me? For you are part of the total movement of life. You are not a mistake in it, you are it. This realization does not make you passive, it makes you deeply alive. You become more responsive, more present, more in tune with the subtle cues of existence. You begin to sense what life is asking of you in each moment, and you respond naturally without hesitation. You don't have to plan your authenticity. It simply expresses itself. Sometimes people think awakening will make them separate from the world, as though they will float above it all in eternal peace. But the truth is just the opposite. Awakening brings you closer to everything. You begin to taste the rawness of life, the salt and the sweetness together. You cry more easily, laugh more deeply, love more honestly, because you are no longer afraid of feeling. You are no longer hiding behind defenses. You are open, unguarded, and that vulnerability is strength itself. You discover that to be fully human is not to escape life, but to embrace it completely. Now, you may wonder, if everything is perfect as it is, what's the point of doing anything at all? Why act? Why strive? Why care? And the answer is very simple, because that is what life does. Life creates, moves, evolves, and expresses itself endlessly. The awakened person does not act to reach a goal. They act because it is their nature to do so. The flower blooms not to impress anyone, but because blooming is what it does. The bird sings not to win applause, but because song is its essence. In the same way, your actions, when aligned with awareness, are no longer forced. They are spontaneous expressions of life's intelligence. They need no justification. This is what true purpose feels like. Not a rigid plan, but a flowing expression. You realize that you don't need to find your purpose. You need only to remove the noise that hides it. The purpose of life is not something given to you. It is what you give to life through your being. Every smile, every act of kindness, every moment of awareness is an offering. You are not here to conquer the world. You are here to be the world in conscious form. And slowly, gratitude begins to color everything you experience. You start to feel thankful even for the ordinary, the mundane, the things you once ignored. You wake up in the morning and notice the warmth of the blanket, the sound of the wind, the breath in your lungs. You realize that every single moment is a gift, not because it's pleasant, but because it exists. Gratitude is the natural fragrance of awareness. You don't have to practice it. It arises effortlessly when you are truly present. It's not something you say, it's something you feel in your bones. As this gratitude deepens, life becomes luminous. Even the simplest actions shine with quiet significance. Drinking a cup of tea, watching the sky change color, walking down the street, each becomes an act of participation in the mystery. You begin to see that enlightenment was never about escaping the world, but about seeing it clearly, seeing it as divine, even in its ordinariness. The awakened person doesn't need to go anywhere else. Heaven is not a destination. It's the realization that this, right now, is sacred. And then one day, without fanfare, you find that your search has ended. You no longer wake up asking, how do I become awakened? Because you understand that there was never anyone to awaken. The seeker and the sought were one and the same all along. The game of becoming has dissolved, leaving only being, and being is enough. You no longer measure your worth by what you achieve or what others see. You rest in the quiet certainty that to exist is the ultimate success. This, you see, is what awakened people gain that they can never lose. It's not a special state, not a mystical power, but a simple, profound intimacy with life. The gain is not something added, it's the removal of the illusion that you ever lacked. You have always been whole, always been free, always been the dance itself. The clouds may come and go, but the sky remains untouched. So what does it mean, really, to awaken? It means to stop pretending, to stop chasing the mirage of a future that never arrives, to stop believing that happiness depends on what happens. It means to relax into the mystery, to trust the unfolding, to realize that this moment, just as it is, contains the entire universe. You have nothing to gain because you were never missing anything. And in that realization, the search ends, not with a bang, but with a smile. That is the quiet laughter of awakening. It is the sound of life recognizing itself. It is the joy of a wave, realizing it was never separate from the sea. And once you hear that laughter, truly hear it, you know there is nothing left to fear, nothing left to chase, nothing left to lose. You are home, and you always were.
Why is it that so many people who are spiritually sensitive, who seem to have this inner knowing, this capacity for awareness, were born into families that were, shall we say, less than ideal, families that were dysfunctional, toxic, painful? And you might think, well, if the universe is so wise, if there's some kind of intelligence behind all this, why would it put these sensitive souls into such difficult circumstances? But what if I told you that this is not a mistake? What if the very thing you've been cursing, the very situation you've been trying to run from your entire life, is actually the most important, not because suffering is noble, but because sometimes the hardest soil produces the strongest trees. See, we have this notion that spiritual awakening should come through pleasant experiences, through meditation retreats, through reading wise books, through sitting quietly in beautiful gardens. And yes, these things can help. But the real awakening, the kind that shakes you to your bones, often comes through fire. It comes through difficulty. It comes through having everything you thought you needed stripped away until all that remains is what you truly are. Think about it this way. If you were born into a perfectly harmonious family, where everyone was kind and understanding, where love flowed freely and naturally, would you ever question anything?
Would you ever look deeper? Would you ever have to develop that inner strength, that capacity to see through illusion? Probably not. You'd simply flow along with the current, never knowing there was anything else. But a toxic family, a dysfunctional family, they give you something else entirely. They give you friction. They give you problems that cannot be solved by ordinary means. They give you situations where you cannot simply go along with what everyone else is doing, because what everyone else is doing is clearly mad. And in that friction, in that impossibility, something begins to wake up. Let me put it to you another way. When a grain of sand gets into an oyster, it irritates, it hurts. The oyster cannot simply eject it. So what does the oyster do? It begins to coat the grain of sand with layers of nacre, slowly, patiently, and eventually that irritating grain becomes a pearl. The most beautiful thing the oyster creates comes from the thing that hurt it most. Your toxic family was the grain of sand. And you, through all your struggles, through all your pain, through all those years of trying to understand why they were the way they were, you've been creating. You've been developing something that people born into easy circumstances never have to develop. Wisdom. Real wisdom. Not the kind you read in books, but the kind that comes from having to figure out how to survive when everything around you is chaos. But here's where it gets really interesting. A toxic family doesn't just create problems. It creates a very specific kind of problem. It creates confusion about love. And this, strange as it sounds, is the gateway to awakening. You see, most people never question what love is. They simply accept whatever their family taught them. If their family was loving, they assume that's what love looks like. If their family was distant, they assume love is supposed to be distant. They never have to think about it. They never have to examine it. They simply repeat the pattern. But when you're born into a toxic family, you cannot do this. The pattern is so obviously broken that you cannot simply repeat it. You might try it first. Many do, but eventually something in you rebels. Something in you says, no, this isn't right. This isn't what love is supposed to be. And in that moment of rebellion, in that refusal to accept the pattern, you've taken the first step toward awakening, because now you must figure out for yourself what love actually is. You cannot rely on what you were taught. You cannot trust the programming. You have to go deeper. You have to look within. You have to discover what love means when it's not mixed up with manipulation, with control, with conditions, with all the garbage your family attached to it. Not to suffer, though there was suffering. Not to be damaged, though there was damage. But to be forced to wake up, to be forced to question, to be forced to look deeper than most people ever have to look. Now, I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean the pain wasn't real. It doesn't mean what happened to you was okay. It doesn't mean you should feel grateful for abuse or neglect or whatever it was your family did. That would be missing the point entirely. The pain was real. The damage was real. What happened to you was not right. But here's the thing about reality. It doesn't care about our ideas of right and wrong. A tree doesn't grow straight by being kept in a greenhouse. It grows straight by being bent by the wind, by having to reach for the light, by having to develop deep roots to keep from being blown over. The wind is not kind. The wind is just wind. But without the wind, the tree would never develop strength. Your family was the wind. And you, whether you know it or not, have been developing roots that go very deep. Roots that most people never have to grow. And those roots, that depth, that's what makes you capable of understanding things that others cannot understand. Think about the people you know who had easy childhoods. Pleasant, comfortable, everything handed to them. What are they like now? I'm not saying they're bad people. But often, they have a certain shallowness to them, don't they? A certain inability to grasp the darker, deeper aspects of life. They live on the surface because they've never had to go beneath it. They believe in fairy tales because their life has been something of a fairy tale. But you cannot believe in fairy tales. You've seen behind the curtain. You know that families can be cruel, that parents can be selfish, that love can be twisted into something ugly.
And while this knowledge was painful to acquire, it has made you real in a way that protected people never become. You've been stripped of illusions. And while most people spend their entire lives clinging to illusions, you don't have that luxury. You had to see things as they actually are. And seeing things as they actually are, that's the beginning of wisdom. That's the beginning of spiritual awakening. Now let's talk about something else. Something that might make you uncomfortable. Because here's a truth that's hard to accept. Your family wasn't just toxic to you. They were toxic because they were wounded. They were wounded because their parents were wounded. And their parents were wounded because their parents were wounded. It goes back and back and back, generation after generation, each one passing on the pain they received because they didn't know how to do anything else. You are the culmination of all that pain. All those generations of wounds, they all flowed into you. And you were the one who finally said, this stops here. You were the one who finally looked at the pattern and said, no more. I will not pass this on. I will not continue this cycle. And that is why you're different. That is why you were chosen, if you want to use that word. Not because you're special in some ego sense, but because your soul was strong enough to say, I will carry this weight. I will be the one who breaks the chain. Think about what that means. Your family, as toxic as they were not your enemies. They were your teachers. Terrible teachers, yes. Teachers who taught through pain rather than love. But teachers nonetheless. They showed you exactly what not to do. They showed you exactly what happens when people don't wake up, when they don't question, when they simply repeat the patterns they inherited. And by showing you what not to do, they forced you to figure out what to do. They forced you to become conscious. They forced you to choose. Because you see, that's the real gift. Choice. Most people never have to choose how to be. They simply are what their family made them. They're automatons, robots, running on programming they never questioned. But you had to choose. You had to consciously decide what kind of person you wanted to be. You had to consciously decide what you believed love was. You had to consciously decide what values you would hold, what kind of relationships you would have, what kind of life you would build. Nothing was automatic, nothing was given. Everything had to be chosen. And in that choosing, in that constant, difficult work of choosing, you became awake. You became conscious. You became, in the truest sense, yourself. Not what your family wanted you to be, not what society expected you to be, but what you, in your deepest knowing, chose to be. Now here's where people often get confused. They think awakening means being happy all the time, being peaceful all the time, being detached from everything. But that's not awakening. That's just another kind of sleep, another kind of escape. Real awakening means seeing clearly. It means understanding the patterns. It means recognizing that your family's behavior was not about you. It was never about you. It was about them, their wounds, their pain, their inability to love, because they had never been loved properly themselves. And when you see this, really see it, something extraordinary testing. The anger begins to dissolve. Not because you force it to, not because you think you should forgive, but because you finally understand. You understand that they were not villains. They were wounded people acting out their wounds, unable to do anything else because no one ever showed them another way. Does this mean you have to have a relationship with them? No. Does this mean you have to trust them? Absolutely not. Does this mean you have to subject yourself to their toxicity? Not at all. Understanding is not the same as allowing abuse. Compassion is not the same as being a doormat. You can understand someone completely and still choose to stay away from them. You can have compassion for their wounds and still protect yourself from their behavior. These are not contradictions. These are simply different levels of understanding. The truly awakened person knows this. They know that protecting yourself is not the same as hating. They know that setting boundaries is not the same as being cruel. They know that you can wish someone well while also wishing them well from a great distance. And this is the freedom that comes from having been born into a toxic family. You learn to love without attachment. You learn to care without being consumed.
You learn to see people clearly without judgment, because you've had to do all these things with your own family. People from healthy families, they often struggle with this. They feel guilty for setting boundaries. They feel selfish for prioritizing their own needs. They confuse love with sacrifice, with enduring pain, with putting up with behavior that damages them, because that's what they were taught. But you learned a different lesson. You learned that real love includes boundaries, that real love sometimes means saying no, that real love sometimes means walking away, not with anger, not with hatred, but simply with the clear understanding that this situation is not good for you, and you have every right to choose situations that are. This is spiritual maturity. This is what most people spend lifetimes trying to learn, and you learned it early because you had no choice. Your family gave you an advanced course in what love is not, and in learning that, you also learned what love is. Let me share something with you. The most spiritually awake people I've ever known, they all had difficult childhoods. All of them. And for years I wondered why. Why does suffering seem to be the common denominator in awakening? And then I realized it's not about the suffering. It's about the questioning that suffering produces. When life is easy, you don't question. You don't have to. But when life is hard, when it doesn't make sense, when the people who are supposed to love you hurt you instead, you start asking the big questions. Why am I here? What is this all about? What is real and what is illusion? These questions, these are the questions that lead to awakening. Your toxic family pushed you to ask these questions early. They pushed you to look for meaning in a situation that seemed meaningless. They pushed you to find love in yourself because you couldn't find it in them. They pushed you to develop an inner life because the outer life was too painful. And in developing that inner life, in turning inward because the outer world was so harsh, you found something most people never find. You found your true self, not the self your family wanted you to be. Not the self society expected you to be, but the self you actually are, beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the wounds, beneath all the stories. This self, this true self, it was always there. But most people never discover it, because they never have to look for it. They're too busy living on the surface, too busy being who everyone expects them to be. But you had to dig deep, because the surface was unbearable. And in digging deep, you struck gold. Now here's the final piece of this understanding. Your awakening is not just for you. It's for everyone. It's for your family, even though they may never acknowledge it. It's for the generations that came before you, because in healing yourself, you heal the ancestral line. And it's for the generations that will come after you, because you've broken the pattern, you've stopped the cycle. You've said, this madness ends with me. This is what it means to be spiritually awake. It's not about being better than others. It's not about being special. It's about being awake enough to see the patterns, strong enough to break them, and brave enough to choose differently even when it's difficult. Your toxic family was the darkness that forced you to find your own light. They were the problem that forced you to become the solution. They were the question that forced you to find the answer. And the answer you found, the light you discovered, it's not just for you. So yes, being born into a toxic family is a gift. Not because the toxicity was good, but because it forced you to become who you really are. It forced you to wake up when you might have slept through your entire life. It forced you to question when you might have simply accepted. It forced you to choose when you might have simply followed. And now, having done all that work, having climbed that mountain, having discovered that light within yourself, you stand as proof that transformation is possible, that breaking cycles is possible, that awakening is possible. Not despite the difficulties, but because of them. This is the great gift. This is why you were placed exactly where you were placed. Not to suffer, but to awaken. Not to be broken. You know, there's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs when someone begins to wake up, when someone starts to see through the game that everyone else is playing. and that is they become frightening to other people. Now, why should this be? Why should clarity be threatening? Why should someone who sees deeply into the nature of things make others uncomfortable? Well, let me tell you, it's one of the most interesting aspects of human psychology, and it reveals something very profound about the way we organize our collective lives, our societies, our very sense of who we are. You see, most people are living in what I call a mutual conspiracy. We've all agreed, tacitly, unconsciously, to believe certain things about reality. We've agreed that the emperor is wearing clothes, even though he's quite naked. We've agreed that this piece of paper called money has value. We've agreed that these arbitrary lines on a map called borders are real and important. We've agreed that you are you and I am I, and we're separate, isolated individuals competing for scarce resources in a hostile universe. Now, none of these things are fundamentally true. They're conventions, agreements, useful fictions that allow us to organize society and get along with each other. But we've forgotten that they're fictions. We've mistaken the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. And we live our entire lives inside this agreed-upon hallucination, never questioning it, never looking behind the curtain. Then along comes someone who has seen through it, someone who has realized that the emperor has no clothes, someone who has awakened from the collective dream. And what does this person do? Well, if they're wise, they might say nothing at all. They might simply smile and go about their business. But even their silence, even their smile, can be deeply unsettling to others. Because you see, when you encounter someone who has seen through the game, something inside you recognizes it. Some part of you knows that they know something you've been trying very hard not to know. They represent a threat to your entire framework of reality, your entire sense of security and identity. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a theater, watching a film, completely absorbed in the story. You're identifying with the hero, you're afraid of the villain, you're emotionally invested in the outcome. Then someone leans over and whispers, "You know, it's just actors on a screen. None of this is real." How do you feel? Annoyed, probably. You don't want to be reminded that it's just a film. You want to stay in the illusion because the illusion is entertaining, it's engaging, it gives you something to feel strongly about. Now, multiply that by 1,000, and you begin to understand why people fear those who see too much. Because what these awakened individuals see is that everything, not just the film in the theater, but your job, your relationships, your ambitions, your fears, your entire life story is in a certain sense not as real as you think it is. It's a role you're playing, a character you're performing, a dream you're dreaming. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to be told that what they're taking so seriously is fundamentally a game, a play, a cosmic joke. Because if it's just a game, then what have they been doing all these years? All that striving, all that suffering, all those achievements and failures, were they for nothing? The awakened person seems to threaten the very meaning of your existence. But there's something even deeper going on. You see, our entire social structure is built on people taking the game seriously. Civilization requires that people show up to their jobs, pay their taxes, follow the rules, pursue success, fear failure, and generally behave as if all of this matters in some ultimate, absolute sense. The system needs you to be asleep, to be hypnotized, to be convinced that the symbols and abstractions we've created are real and important. Someone who has awakened from this trance is dangerous to the system. Not because they're going to rebel or cause trouble, necessarily quite the opposite. They might be perfectly content and peaceful, but their very existence, their very presence, reminds others that there's a way out of the trap. They're like someone who has escaped from prison and come back to visit. The prisoners don't want to see them because it reminds them that the prison bars are, in a sense, optional. Throughout history, we see this pattern repeating. The awakened ones, the seers, the prophets, the mystics, they're consistently marginalized, ridiculed, persecuted, or killed. Not always, of course. Sometimes they're tolerated, sometimes they're even venerated, but usually only after they're safely dead and their teachings have been domesticated
and made harmless. But while they're alive, while they're actually demonstrating that another way of being is possible, they make people very nervous. Think of Socrates, who was condemned to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. What was his crime, really? He was asking questions, encouraging people to think for themselves, to examine their assumptions, to see through the conventional beliefs of society. And for this he had to drink hemlock. The authorities couldn't tolerate someone showing the young people that the emperor had no clothes. Or think of Jesus, who was crucified essentially for the same reason. He was pointing to a reality beyond the religious and political structures of his time. He was saying that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that you don't need priests or temples or elaborate rituals to connect with the divine. This was tremendously threatening to the establishment, both religious and political, because if people realized this, the whole power structure would collapse. The person who sees too much reveals something that most people desperately want to keep hidden, even from themselves. They reveal that you are not who you think you are. That little voice in your head that you call I, that anxious, worried, ambitious entity that's always trying to get somewhere or become something that's not you. That's just a thought pattern, a habit of mind, a character you've been playing for so long that you've forgotten it's a character. What you really are is much vaster, much more mysterious, much more free than this little ego identity. You are the consciousness in which all of this appears. You are not separate from the world, from the universe, from existence itself. You are what the whole cosmos is doing at this particular place and time, just as a wave is what the whole ocean is doing at a particular place and time. But this realization, this seeing, undermines everything that society has taught you about who you are and what you should be doing with your life. It undermines the whole story of progress and achievement and making something of yourself. Because if you're already it, if you're already the universe experiencing itself, then what is there to achieve? Where is there to go? Now, don't misunderstand me. The awakened person doesn't become passive or lazy or irresponsible. Quite the contrary. They often become more engaged with life, more creative, more compassionate. But they're playing the game of life knowingly, consciously, without being trapped by it. They're dancing, but they know they're dancing. And this knowledge, this freedom, is what others find so threatening. Because if you're around someone like this for any length of time, something starts to happen. The certainty you had about your beliefs begins to wobble. The stories you've been telling yourself start to sound a bit hollow. The fears and desires that have been driving you begin to lose their grip. And this is terrifying, because these beliefs, these stories, these fears and desires, they're what you've been using to navigate life. They're your map. And if the map is wrong, if it's just a fiction, then you're lost. The person who sees too much doesn't even have to say anything directly challenging. Their very being, their very presence, emanates a kind of freedom that exposes the bondage others are in. It's like someone walking around without chains, in a prison where everyone else is shackled. The shackled prisoners don't feel grateful, they feel accused. They feel judged, even though no judgment is being made. This is why awakened individuals often learn to hide their light, so to speak. They learn to speak in parables and paradoxes, to couch their insights in acceptable language, to appear more conventional than they are, because they've learned that most people aren't ready to hear the truth. Most people are too invested in their illusions, too identified with their roles, too afraid of the freedom that comes with seeing through the game. And, there's a kind of violence in waking someone up before they're ready. If someone is having a pleasant dream, you don't shake them awake unless the house is on fire. The person who sees too much understands this. They understand that awakening happens in its own time, that you can't force it, that everyone is exactly where they need to be in their journey. But still, their very existence is a kind of invitation, a possibility, a door standing open. And for those who are ready, who are beginning to question their own dream, who are starting to feel that something isn't quite right with the official version of reality for these people, encountering someone who has seen through the veil can be life-changing. It can be the catalyst for their own awakening. However, for those who aren't ready, who are deeply invested in the dream, who have built their entire identity and sense of security on the collective hallucination for these people, The awakened individual is a threat that must be neutralized. And society has many ways of doing this. The most obvious way is simply to ignore them, to dismiss them as crazy or impractical or naive. Oh, that's all very nice and mystical, people say, but you can't live that way in the real world. You've got bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, a life to live. As if the awakened person isn't living. As if they're somehow less engaged with reality rather than more engaged. But you see, this dismissal reveals the real fear. What if they're right? What if there is another way to live that doesn't involve all this striving and suffering and anxiety? What if you could be in the world fully without being of it, without being trapped by it? This possibility is so threatening that it must be dismissed immediately, without examination. Another way society deals with those who see too much is to try to capture them, to domesticate them, to turn them into another part of the system. Oh, you've had a spiritual experience? Wonderful. Why don't you write a book about it? Give some lectures. Start a retreat center. And before you know it, the person who saw through the game has become a player in a new game, a spiritual seeking game, which can be just as much of a trap as any other game. Or society might try to explain away their insights. Oh, you think you've awakened? That's just a neurological phenomenon, or a psychological state, or the result of meditation practice, as if giving it a label somehow diminishes it, somehow makes it safe and manageable and less threatening. But these labels are just more concepts, more ways of avoiding the direct encounter with what is. The deepest fear that people have about those who see too much is not that they're wrong, but that they're right, that there really is another way of experiencing reality. That the anxiety and suffering and endless striving that characterizes most human life is not necessary, not inevitable, not the price we have to pay for being conscious beings. Because if that's true, then you've been had. You've been living in a prison of your own making. You've been taking seriously what doesn't need to be taken seriously, and ignoring what really matters. You've been, in the words of Thoreau, living a life of quiet desperation when you could have been dancing. And nobody wants to realize this. It's too painful. It's easier to dismiss the awakened ones as deluded, impractical, or dangerous than to consider that they might be seeing something you're missing. It's easier to stay in the comfortable prison of your familiar suffering than to step into the terrifying freedom of not knowing who you are. But here's the beautiful paradox. The awakened person isn't actually threatening you. They're not trying to take anything from you or impose anything on you. In fact, they see you more clearly and compassionately than you see yourself. They see that you're playing a role, yes, but they also see what's behind the role, the same consciousness, the same awareness, the same fundamental being that they've discovered in themselves. They see that you're afraid, and they understand why. They see that you're suffering, and they have compassion. They see that you're lost in the dream, and they remember what that's like because they were lost too once. They're not judging you. They're simply being what they are. And their being serves as a mirror in which you might, if you dare to look, see your own true nature reflected. The fear that people feel toward those who see too much is really the fear of their own freedom. It's the fear of discovering that they've been playing a game all along that they could have stopped any time they wanted. It's the fear of responsibility, not the conventional responsibility of paying bills and meeting obligations, but the deeper responsibility of being the author of your own experience, the creator of your own reality. You see, as long as you believe that reality is fixed and solid and you're just a small, separate individual trying to survive in it, then you're off the hook. You can blame circumstances, other people, your past, your genetics, society, anything. But if you wake up and see that you are not separate from reality, that you are reality experiencing itself, then suddenly you can't blame anyone or anything. You are it. And that's a terrifying realization for most people. The person who sees too much has accepted this responsibility. They've stopped arguing with reality, stopped resisting what is, stopped pretending to be other than what they are. And in that acceptance, in that surrender, they've found a kind of freedom that others can scarcely imagine. Not freedom from circumstances. They still have bodies that get sick, relationships that have difficulties, problems to solve. But freedom from the psychological suffering that comes from resistance, from wanting things to be different than they are, from identifying with a separate self that must constantly defend and promote itself. This freedom is attractive and terrifying in equal measure. It's attractive because everyone wants to be free of suffering. But it's terrifying because it requires dying, not physically, but psychologically. It requires the death of the ego, the death of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what life is about. And nobody wants to die, even metaphorically, even when that death would lead to a greater life. So people fear those who see too much because they represent a kind of death, the death of illusion, the death of the familiar, the death of the known. But they also represent a kind of birth, the birth into reality, into presence, into your true nature. And birth, like death, is frightening, even when it's exactly what needs to happen. The tragedy is that this fear causes people to miss the very thing they most deeply long for. Beneath all the striving and achieving and worrying and planning, there's a deep longing for peace, for wholeness, for coming home to yourself. The person who sees too much has found that home, not by going anywhere or becoming anything, but simply by waking up to what they already are. And their message, though it's often unspoken, is simply this: you can wake up too. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to take the dream so seriously. You don't have to spend your whole life trying to become something other than what you already are. You are it. You've always been it. You could never be anything else. But this message, this truth, is too simple, too immediate, too obvious. People want something more complicated, more difficult, more distant. They want a path to follow, a goal to achieve, something to do. And the awakened person says, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do because you're already there and you're already doing it. And people find this infuriating because it pulls the rug out from under their entire project of self-improvement and spiritual seeking. So they fear those who see too much, because these awakened ones reveal the cosmic joke, the divine comedy, the ultimate irony, that what you're seeking is what's seeking, that the seeker is the sought, that you are what you're looking for. And once you get the joke, once you really see it, you can't help but laugh. But until you get it, the laughter of the awakened sounds like mockery, and their peace looks like indifference, and their freedom feels like an accusation.